For businesses, especially those who work with the enterprise and government clients, I'm sure a lot of times you have to fill a lot of RFPs, you have to fill a lot of proposals, and I'm familiar with that because I've had a business do that before, and it can be a torturous and mind-numbing process. Today on the Take Your Business podcast, we'll talk with an entrepreneur who is building a product or who has built a product that would help take the worst part of that process away from you so you can go through more proposals, fill more RFPs, and win more contracts for your business. Today on the podcast, we'll have Peter Bonney. So welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So can you tell us what tell us about your product, about yourself, who your
Sure.
product serves.
Yeah. So I'm the CEO and founder of FastBreak, and what we do is we help companies understand their existing knowledge with AI in order to use that knowledge to complete proposals, complete RFPs, repetitive questionnaires like security questionnaires and compliance documents, so that, as you said, they can compete on more bids, invest less time in them, and also, as an added benefit, frankly, complete them more accurately because people do worry about AI making mistakes, but people make mistakes too. And in our analysis so far, our data shows that actually the AI answers are more accurate than human answers, which is interesting.
Amazing. I think that's every day we see one new use of AI that's
Mhm.
it makes it such an amazing tool. So, what inspired you to create this tool to go into this space? What problem were you trying to solve, or what problem did you meet? Because most times it's a problem you meet that inspires you to
Yes.
do something like this. Yeah.
Honestly, I was solving my own problem. So this is software company number two. The first product was focusing on managing suppliers and selling to large companies. And part of selling to large companies and selling to our end users, who were procurement teams, supply chain teams, we responded to a lot of RFPs. And I eventually got pretty frustrated at having to do that. And so, you know, post Chat GPT, I just had the idea, like, can't we automate this? Can't we leverage large language models to, kind of look at our content and write most of this information? Not all of it. I mean, some of it, we actually do need to think about
Yeah.
how we want to position things for the customer and how we address their specific needs. But most of the content in these RFPs is repetitive. It's things like, for a software product, where do you host your platform, right? Like, that doesn't change. Do you encrypt your data? Like, all of these things are the same from customer to customer. And so, yeah, we built an internal tool to help us respond to RFPs. And we liked it so much, we said, actually, this is we should focus on this. And so we separated that and exited the first business, and that's what we're doing now. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So now for some for clients you've worked with on this product, what are the biggest pain points you've seen them solve using this product, especially with responding to RFPs and these repetitive questionnaires you mentioned?
The biggest pain point that we see is, like, most of the people who have to get involved in these RFPs, it's not their main job, right? I mean, if you are a relatively large company and you're putting out proposals, you're responding to RFPs, then you might have a team that's dedicated to doing it, and they're the ones who kind of drive the process. But on all of these RFPs, there's going to be information that you need to go to subject matter experts to complete. And those subject matter experts, if it's like an IT related question, a security related question, legal, compliance, their day job is not responding to RFPs. Their job is doing those tasks, right? And so, it's a major pain point for them. It's a major cost to the company to have these people sort of distracted from their primary job to, complete these RFPs, to contribute to them, especially when it's so repetitive. So the biggest benefit to this is those people can, provide their information one time or relatively infrequently, right? And that becomes training data for the AI model to answer on future RFPs based on the knowledge that they've already contributed. And so it's just a lot less frustrating for them. They don't feel like they're repeating themselves all the time. It turns them from, writers to editors. So instead of like getting a blank document and they've got to fill in a bunch of stuff and they don't know where to begin, they'll, get like 90% of the questions answered by AI, and they just have to review it and say like, okay, yeah, this is right, I'm going to change this, or this is old. And it's a much less frustrating process for them. They invest a lot less time, and they feel like it's a better use of their time.
Sure. Okay, so now for a typical, I think let's visualize the RFP process a bit,
Yeah.
the RFP response process a bit. So for a typical RFP response, how much time and effort will typically go into it from a business? And just let's visualize it so people see how
Yeah.
painful it can be.
There's data out there on this. A typical 250 question RFP is going to take about 2 person weeks, about 80 hours to respond to. Yeah,
Wow.
I mean they're big, and if you're talking about 1,000 questions, then you can do the math. Um, it's a big. It's extremely time consuming. So yeah, I mean, just do the you can figure out how much it's costing you. Just figure out the time the cost of your average person, and also consider that these subject matter experts who have to contribute to these are often the most valuable people in your company, right? Because it's like people in IT, it's experts in legal. Like these are, it's not like you're not handing this off to an intern and saying just fill it in.
Yeah.
It's real money that you invest in these for a very uncertain outcome.
Okay, so now I think going over to your product. So can you just give us a high level overview? I think you mentioned some of it a bit a while ago. So just a high level overview of how the product works, how it from where it gets an RFP to where it's to the end, how it works. Yeah,
Yeah.
generally.
Well, so it even starts a step before that, right? Because the very first thing, in order for our product to do anything of value for you, it needs to have information about your company, right? So the very first thing is to provide content, to build a content library. And that could be RFPs you've completed in the past. It can be marketing materials, sales materials, documentation, um, compliance materials, whatever it is that your people would look at when completing an RFP, like the stuff that they would go look up. That goes into your content library. And from there, you do this one time, right? You build your content library one time, and you'll keep it up to date, of course. But the more time you invest, we find in curating your content library, in sort of making sure that everything in there is relevant, because the AI doesn't know, right? The AI doesn't know what's good information from bad information. You give it two pieces of information, and one's good, one's bad. There's no way for it to discern.
Yeah.
So, like giving it the clues and the context, it's a. I don't want to say it's a hugely involved process, but I will say that the customers we see who, just kind of throw everything in there, it does okay. For the ones that like invest more time in making sure that they've got a good solid content library, they get much better results. Anyway, so that's the upfront investment. And then when you get a new RFP, it's very simple. You just upload the document. Most of the time, our AI is able to figure out kind of how the document works and figure out where the questions are and the context, and where the answers should go. Sometimes it needs a little help, and we've got tools for you to tell it like, hey, these are questions and the answers go here, and this is additional information. And then it just goes and it starts drafting. And like I said, I think I mentioned that typically about maybe like 80-90% of the time it will fill in an answer. And then what we find is that about 80 to 90% of those answers are accurate the first time. And so, net in a typical RFP, somewhere between like 20 and 25% of the questions a human's going to have to weigh in on. So after the AI has done its work, there's a collaborative workspace for the manager of the project to assign subject matter experts, get comments back, for people to make edits and then track those edits, and then collaboratively build the whole proposal until it's ready to go.
Interesting.
That's it.
So now,
Yeah.
one thing, one thing we notice over time is most times when text is generated by
Yes.
AI, it always looks a particular type of way. So, are there no
Yes.
issues from these companies bringing out this RFP? Won't there be issues of them maybe saying it's obviously an AI generated response or something like that?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I will say we've started to see some buyers asking questions about whether there's any AI generated content in their RFP responses. Which I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think that ultimately what they should care about is whether it's accurate or not. They
Yeah.
shouldn't. It's not meant to be an endurance exercise. It's not sort of a trial to see how much pain you can put your seller through. It's you want to get the accurate information, and so if AI is more accurate, that's preferable. um, well, I'll set that aside for a second. So to get back to your specific question, definitely AI has kind of a voice and a style from what we've seen. um, but the way an application like this works, as opposed to just kind of going to ChatGPT and saying, hey, write a paragraph about encryption, like it will definitely kind of have the same voice every time. When you're basing the answers on the way your own company has written about it before, particularly when we talk about marketing materials and things like that,
Yeah.
um, it will much more closely follow the voice of your brand, assuming that you've got a brand voice, right? I mean, that's really the most important thing. If you have a way that you talk about your company and a style that is in the training materials, that style is going to come through in your RFP responses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
does. Yeah. So I think one other thing, the return. Have you what kind of return on investment, return on productivity have you seen an actual client using your product have?
Um, it, it's so high that it almost sounds absurd. Like we've seen, ROIs in the thousands,
Wow.
um, because look, it radically cuts down the amount of time that you have to spend. I gave you the statistic earlier. About 80 hours for a typical RFP response. You know, when the we've seen that the typical reduction in time is about 70 between 70 and 90% per RFP, and that conforms to data we've seen from competitors as well. So, just on the time savings alone, right? Like how much is 70, whatever we're talking about, like 50 to 70 hours saved per RFP, right? Times the salary of the person. You don't have to do very many of these to more than cover the license costs of the software, and that's without even getting into the possibility of then bidding on more business, right, and winning more deals. And the other aspect of this, right, and this is actually probably this is not what brings people in the door. So I don't talk about it that much. Like we don't really market this because
Yeah.
it's not the first thing people think of. But once they're using it, they start to realize, this is the second thing they think of, is, oh, um, we have so much more time to respond to this RFP that we can actually, instead of scrambling just to fill in all the information and get it out the door and just like do our quick checks, we're actually able to think about the prospect's needs and do the human aspect of this, the part the AI is never going to do, which is like actually build a compelling value story for the buyer, right? um, they're able to invest a lot more time in that, and so they're actually able to make their proposal quality much better, right? So they take some of those time savings they're getting and reinvest that in making the proposal more compelling, and our customers are seeing even bigger benefits from having that additional bandwidth to do that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because
Yeah.
yeah, because at least once the intimidating questions are all filled out and everything, then you know, okay, at least now you can take time and just focus on the ones that I think it's sort of an 80-20 thing on the 20% that's really important in that RFP.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing that like people don't really talk about a lot with RFPs. Well, I should say, okay, I think everybody who responds to RFPs talks about this, but like it's a little bit of a taboo to talk about publicly because I think people don't want to irritate their clients. But the reality is, if you got an honest opinion from the buyers who are issuing these RFPs, I think they would also agree that 80-90% of it is repetitive. It's checking a box, right? There's it's actually really interesting. Like, so from my old business, like we've done a little. We used to do like a little bit of forensic analysis of RFPs that we saw people issue, and you can kind of see if you kind of just go below the surface, you can kind of see that like every section that ends up in I say like a technology RFP represents some problem they had in the past with an IT purchase, right?
Yeah,
And so they had some problem with downtime, and so now you've got all this stuff about downtime. They had some problem with on-premise servers, and so now you have this whole section about on-premise servers that has nothing to do with your product, right? This is a cloud product, but like, why am I answering these questions about my on-premise server setup? It's like, well, it's in the template. We had this problem before. I'm not going to take it out of the template because if something goes wrong, that's going to be a big problem. But that's what ends up being most of the RFP is like this repetitive stuff that somebody feels like they've got to ask the question just in case anything goes wrong. But that's not what's going to win the business, right? That's not where they're going to make their decision. Like, you're going to answer on every RFP. Again, I'm thinking of like a software company. A software company on every RFP gets asked the question, do you encrypt your data in transit and at rest, right? And the answer to that for every software company for the last 10 years is yes. Like, everybody does it. It's almost impossible to not do it, right?
yeah,
Um, no one's going to win the business by answering that question, but they're still going to ask it, of course. And there are so many questions in each RFP that are of that form. And so like, yeah, like 80-20, right? If you can answer that 80%, that like the buyer just needs to, see that box checked and the seller just needs to confirm it. And like, really that's, it's like the 20% that both sides are really going to focus on, the stuff that makes the difference.
yeah.
It's just, we have better results for everybody.
Nice. Now, for customers who are deploying your product in their business, how do they typically deploy? Is this a web-based or locally installed software?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's all cloud based. We host on Google Cloud. We use all major tech providers. It's that's another interesting topic. That there's actually, I mean, there's a ton of alternatives out there to Google and AWS and Microsoft and IBM, but there's not, especially as a smaller software company. You know, you answer so many questions. You're able to answer so many questions and so many concerns about security by just saying, yes, we hosted Google. Yes, we hosted AWS. And so we just do that. We do have the option of deploying on our customers' private clouds, which is an interest, something that some of them are interested in, particularly financial services or non-US companies. We're based in the US, but we do have users outside the US, and some of them do want to deploy on either they're fine with Google, but they want to deploy outside the US for data privacy reasons,
Yeah.
or they want to host on their own cloud, and we can do that as well. We haven't yet put it on like a physical server, but very few people actually maintain server rooms these days.
Right. Interesting. So now, I think one issue people generally have
Mhm.
with AI tools and AI in
Mhm.
general is they have the feeling that
Yes.
any data they put into AI will be used to train the AI or stuff like that. So, how
Yes.
do you handle concerns like this about this?
Yeah, it's a big concern. It's one thing that every customer asks us about at some point. The good news is that the major AI, the foundational AI models, the providers of those models, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, etc., they're all aware of this, and so they make it very easy nowadays. Um, by contract and by structure, uh, none of our data. So we do use these commercial models for the language generation. Um, we do our own processing of our customer data on our own servers to build our semantic understanding of their content. But like the actual writing, like we're just not going to be able to build a better model than OpenAI for writing. And so, we take their content, we figure out the most relevant pieces with our own proprietary setup, and then, we ask OpenAI or Claude, depending on the situation, to write an answer based on the information we provide. So the majority of the customer data, it lives on our systems and never touches one of these partners. Um, but our contractual relationship with these partners is such that they're not using the data we provide to train their models. Um, and that's actually, that's just standard in their contracts now, because they want people to use their models and they know companies care about this. Um, it's really only the consumer facing versions of Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini these days that actually take your data. So yeah, if you're using the free version, it's definitely taking your data, it's training its model. Be aware of that. That's happening. But if you are a company and you have a commercial license, they're not using that data by default.
Interesting. So now the
Yeah.
target market for this product,
Mhm.
what businesses is it most suited for? Is it for small businesses, medium, or the enterprise size businesses?
Yeah, that's a surprisingly difficult question because, you know, the interesting answer is that companies of all sizes have this problem. And the problem is different depending on the size a little bit. But, the real question is the people who have this problem, the common factor is they're selling to large companies. And so, there are lots of small companies out there providing services to large companies, and there's lots of large companies providing services to large companies. Um, now, the particular pain points they have with RFPs are a little bit different. If you're like a 5 or 10 person company, the pain point you have with an RFP is probably really just getting a draft at all, and managing your information, like keeping track
Yeah.
of, well, what did we say last time? Let's work with that and start from there. Especially if you're growing, you don't have a huge library of these things to draw from. Um, so the problem they have is kind of bootstrapping their knowledge to kind of help complete these RFPs, and just the general time invested, because at a 5 to 10 person company, nobody has the full-time job of responding to RFPs. It's a distraction for whoever is dealing with it, right? That's not their main job. At like a 5,000 person company, or bigger, they're going to be entire proposal teams dedicated to this. So at our largest company, our largest customer has 15 proposal managers. They have 200 subject matter experts that touch the system. And a typical RFP for them will involve up to 50 people involved
Oh,
in a single event. And so, it's a different sort of problem. So for the bigger company, when you're talking about 50 people, like, yes, like the getting the AI draft is a big help, but really coordinating and collaborating between those 50 people, that's their biggest pain point. And sort of making sure that like everything is checked and reviewed and goes through compliance before it goes out the door. For like the 5 to 10 person company, it's probably the founder, CEO, or whoever who's doing it themselves. And so they don't have to do any additional compliance checks. They're like, I just need a quick draft. So, all right, that was a long-winded way of saying we help both companies, and we have plans that accommodate both companies. For the small company, you can sign up for a solo plan. It's very affordable, and you just upload your content, get your draft, off you go. For the bigger company, we have more advanced tools for content management, for collaboration, for assigning tasks to groups and sort of tracking kind of like, this needs to go to IT, this needs to go to
Yeah.
legal, this needs both IT and legal, and both need to sign off. And, if legal changes it, then IT needs to recertify, like, those kinds of workflows. They get complex when you're talking about big companies. And that's really where the sort of additional workflows we've built around the RFP that the small companies don't need. Like those are kind of more in the enterprise license that we offer.
Okay, so now what's the future of the product? Where do you see what are future plans for the product? Where do you see the product going in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Look, it's a really interesting time to be building software and to be building AI software, of course, because software is eating the world, but AI is eating software. So you cannot escape from AI, even if you're trying to not be an AI company. Every software company is an AI company, whether they like it or not. And so, yeah, we just leaned into it and built an AI product. But the interesting thing about offering an AI product, especially one that is built on a foundational model like ChatGPT, uh, you know, it's kind of like you're walking in front of a steamroller because they're OpenAI and all of its competitors are also expanding the capabilities of their models and their systems, and they also want commercial clients, right? They are going after the enterprise and B2B customers. And so, you just never know if in 3 months or 6 months, uh, the model itself is going to have like 80% of the capabilities, to complete an RFP, right? On its own. That could happen. I mean, if you looked back a year ago, there were whole classes of companies that were built around augmenting the capabilities of ChatGPT. And then they don't exist anymore because now ChatGPT just does it, right? Like there was a brief window of time where there were whole companies that were charging for the ability to like ask questions of PDF documents, but like that's just built into ChatGPT now. So, we have to be mindful. Like we're constantly discussing internally, like, hey, where is this technology going, right? Like we can't assume that we're just going to be able to charge, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, for people to just get AI answers on a document, because you might just be able to do it with ChatGPT. And so we are always looking for higher value problems, and the thing that we're really focused on is the human collaboration piece. Like that's the thing that keeps coming back up, where the main benefit that people are getting once they're really using the product is they're able to kind of like get the first draft and then really actually work with their team, like really actually engage as humans in human discussions, face-to-face conversation, and real collaboration. And so like I think my hypothesis today is
Yeah.
that in 2 years, maybe even 1 year from now, but certainly 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, that um, the AI piece of this is actually going to be, if not free, very, very cheap. Uh, because I don't think people are going to pay for that for very long. I think you'll just be able to get that for next to nothing out of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And so then, where we expect people to actually be willing to pay is on the value add around that, the collaboration pieces, being able to offer additional enhancements, like pointing out where they can improve the quality of their responses, bringing in additional sources of data to try and actually identify areas for improvement, and things like call recordings and whatnot, to identify like what's going to actually win the business, not just answering the questions based on their existing content. Because like I said, I don't think there's a long runway for that to be a big business.
Yeah. Okay, so now if you could give three actionable tips for business owners who want to streamline their RFP process and make it more efficient, what would those tips be?
Well, I'll say it, like, but this will not be one of my three tips. But like, get a tool. Like, there are a lot of good tools out there. It doesn't have to be ours. Although I love FastBreak, I think we do a great job. It will really make your life easier. But set that aside. Okay. Tip number one. The number one thing you can do to make your process more efficient is actually organize your content. The thing that we spent the most time on my last business in responding to RFPs was just looking up the information that we had already done in the past, right? It's like you get a new RFP, it's like, oh, like I know we responded to something like this before. Where was that? Who had it? Like it feels in the moment like a little bit of a waste of time to organize all your information, but your future self will thank you if you do. So just when you complete an RFP, put it in a safe place. Any content that you use to complete that RFP, put that in the same place, like marketing materials or whatever you cited, so that the next time you get one, you have it to look back to. So organizing your content, that's number one. Number two, um, have a process, right? I think the second way that this falls down for most companies, even pretty large size companies, is they don't actually know what to do when an RFP comes in. They're figuring it out from scratch every time. Like at the most basic level, you should have a person, even if it's not their full-time job. Like you should always know everyone who, every salesperson or marketing person or customer facing person who might receive an RFP, like they should know when I get an RFP, this is what I do with it, right? It goes to this person. Or, if you don't have a person, like this is what I'm going to do to answer this. Everybody should at least know what happens when an RFP comes in. And for a shocking number of companies, like that's not the case. So that's just develop some process is better than no process. So develop a
Yeah.
process. And then the third thing is like I've been talking about, like the 80-20 thing. Like I know, these RFPs is so painful to complete the rote stuff, all this stuff about, where do you host and the data encryption, all this stuff. Try not to get bogged down in that. Like you can read through an RFP and you can pretty clearly identify what are the things that like are just sort of check the box and what are things that what are the clues, where are the clues to what they actually want and care about, and make sure that you invest more of your time in addressing those and not just providing an answer to those, but actually thinking about how you frame the value of your product. And it can be hard when you're overwhelmed and you've got a tight deadline and you just have to answer all of these questions. But it's okay if you make a grammar mistake in your answer about your data encryption, if that extra time that you save by rushing through that is invested in something about the value proposition of your company and really framing that and differentiating your product. So just making sure you invest your time in the right places. That'd be my third tip.
Nice. So now for listeners who want to or watchers who want to continue this episode, learn more about your product or connect with you, what's the
Mhm.
best way they can reach you?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Peter Bonney, easy to find. Fastbreakrfp.com is our website. Check us out.
Okay, so fastbreakrfp.com, LinkedIn, Peter Bonney. So those will be on the screen and the show notes once this episode goes live. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And for the listeners, till next week, check out Peter's LinkedIn, check out Fastbreak RFP, and don't forget to keep taking your business. Bye for now.